Hello and welcome to episode 67 of Linux After Dark. I'm Joe.
I'm Chris.
I'm Gary.
And I'm Dalton.
Welcome back, chaps, and welcome to the show, Jorge Castro. Welcome back, man.
Thank you for having me. It's been a while.
It has been a while. It's been almost a year, actually. Time flies. So, as usual, we've got you on to talk about, I don't think you like this word, immutable Linux, do you?
No, we don't say that anymore.
You don't say that. What is it? Desktop Linux built with cloud native technologies?
Sure. Fedora calls it atomic. They kind of went through that whole exercise this past year while we were gone. We got some things to catch up on.
Yeah. So where are we with it then? What have you been up to in the last year?
In the past 9 months or so, I started to work at the CNCF. I think the last time I talked, I was either on sabbatical or working somewhere else. And over the past 9 months, I've been working at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which on the projects team there to help shepherd cloud native projects through their life cycle, everything from like Kubernetes to Prometheus to everything in the CNCF landscape, which is 184 projects in different stages of maturity in their life cycle and adoption and things like that.
And you apply all of that to the desktop, right?
Yeah. So on the side, I've been doing Universal Blue and Bluefin as kind of like my passion projects. And they've been taking up my personal time, but I've been using them to kind of learn how to apply some of the techniques from new open source users and Linux users, bring some of that energy back into cloud native, and then hopefully to bring the cloud native patterns and things back to the desktop. I'm trying to unify here two groups that normally, actually I would call it three groups now, because since I've last talked to you, someone started up Bazite, which is like a gaming focused edition. So we've got gamers, cloud native nerds, and normal Linux desktop nerds. And I'm trying to find the Venn diagram there of the sweet spot, I guess, is.
Where do all these people agree? Yeah.
Yeah.
Been there.
And you made quite a bold claim to me that you had finished the Linux desktop.
We did. We're done. We are finished. I realized the second that I said that I'd have to quantify it. So I don't know how many people heard the previous episode, but what kind of started me down this journey is just how not reliable the current Linux desktop system is and how it just kind of sucks. And I really want to fix it. And Fedora had built a thing, but it wasn't quite ready. So a bunch of us kind of decided, hey, let's just grab this as a hello world and see what a quote unquote next generation Linux desktop would look like. That's more image-based, more composable, so that you can get all the customization that you have with Linux today, but also have that reliability of something like a Chromebook where, when you get an update, packages don't break, that sort of thing. So it kind of moves us away from the traditional, I grew up in Ubuntu, right? The traditional kind of Deb PPA model where you got to be careful or every 6 months your computer breaks. But I have to have all the software, right? All the cool stuff you read about on whatever favorite website you read. So a bunch of us just kind of got together and prototyped things. And over the past 2 years, it's actually been 2 years now, 2.5 years, I feel we've come up with a model that gives people a reliable base system, GUI apps via Flatpak, and then we use containers on the desktop a little bit more aggressively than, most kind of traditional Linux desktops use. And then we kind of combo it all together into a cool little package when it's called Bazite for gamers, and that has Steam and all the stuff that you want. It also runs on handheld devices like the Steam Deck itself, or if you have a ROG Ally or a Legion Go, which is like a bunch of these Windows handhelds don't have great out-of-the-box Windows experiences. So a bunch of nerds are like, let's get Linux on these things. And because the hardware is very similar, that means only one person has to figure out how to enable Linux on that thing, and then we kind of replicate the pattern. Is that the elevator pitch?
I think so, yeah.
I think so. Well, the reason I say it's also done is it kind of moves away from traditional desktops and more towards what people kind of expect out of a modern system, which is when I open a graphical thing, search for Chrome, click a button that gives me Chrome, and I have Chrome.
So you're saying I shouldn't have to download the deb and sudo dpackage-i path to the deb and install it that way?
You still have to do that, but it's better when someone else does it for you, automated in GitHub, and you just get the final result. The mantra there is kind of adding a SRE/system admin who kind of curates this for you, and you get a more curated experience with an image like Bazite or Bluefin, where, I have to care about the packaging and where we're sourcing our RPMs and things like that. But you as a user just kind of get a finished product. And that's kind of the out-of-the-box experience that we're shooting for.
And it's quite flexible as well, right? Chris has been playing with this over the last few days. And didn't you say you had various installations pinned, Chris?
Yeah, so I have 4 pinned deployments, which I've been playing around with the laptop. I think I started, because you publish ISOs now that you can install from. So I put that on a USB drive, booted from that. And then I ran through the installer for Aurora. So that's the Plasma version of Bluefin, right?
Yeah. So originally I just picked GNOME for Bluefin because that's what I knew. And I already knew like what I wanted the desktop to look like. And then someone once was like, I want a KDE experience for like a work laptop. And we have a pattern that we call the DX pattern, which we call developer experience, right? So they're like, I want the cool VS Code setup that you have with dev containers and all the Kubernetes stuff out of the box, but I want to use KDE, and someone went ahead and built it. So it's kind of a, like if you think of Fedora Kinoite as kind of a generic operating system, Aurora is a little bit more of a curated experience where a group of people are carefully selecting apps and experiences for you to kind of match your use case. And it worked for you, huh?
Yeah, I noticed things like KVM and libvirt is in there. It's in the image. Same with Bluefin, I think. So you don't have to worry about one of the previous things I mentioned before when we tried this a year ago is, obviously we might come on to the fact that you can tailor your own GitHub actions if you wanted that. But it's nice to have a starting image that has, because I installed the DX version, as you mentioned.
Yep.
And Virt Manager is there. You do systemctl status libvirt.d, and that's there as well. So it's ready to go for VMs as well as DistroBox and Podman and all of the other things you mentioned and Flatpak. So that was really cool. But what Joe mentioned about the deployments that was really cool is the ISO obviously puts us in Fedora 39, I think, for Aurora. But there are betas for 40 as RPM-OS tree images that you can pull down. So I fancied having a look at Plasma 6, but I could pin the 39 Plasma 5.27 version, and that was just there in my boot menu. Have a look at Plasma 6 and just go between them really, really quickly and not worry, oh, I've made the jump to Plasma 6 early because I couldn't wait because I had itchy feet. Oh, what do I do now? Well, yeah, okay, if I had some kind of Btrfs snapshot or ZFS, but it's not the same thing. This is just literally, I tap escape and I go back to the previous deployment and it just goes into it with very little waiting time. So I did that. I got a bit carried away. So I've also got XFCE and Sway as pin deploys that I can flip between on the same laptop. And it really, that is the most impressive thing for me. Flipping between those, if you're distro hopping or just you want to have a look at something else, is really, really seamless in this setup.
Yeah, so you're not just mashing Plasma on top of XFCE, for example, and then you've just got like a mixture of different apps, some are Qt, some are GTK. This is properly separated, right?
Except the user space, your home directory. So one of the things we found out, like if you're rebasing from a KDE or GNOME image back and forth, some pieces of software are writing into parts of your dot files that they shouldn't be. So first of all, software should not be doing that. But it was never really an issue before because who thought that you'd be able to just live rebase to a new system and then just have a working computer instantly? So there's definitely some things in there where we've had users that have, the terminal rebasers, like the distro hoppers, who can run into trouble if the dot files between all the stuff is colliding. So that's one of the areas where it's like, well, now that this is possible, desktops and user apps should maybe just right where you're supposed to and not everywhere else. So there are things like that, but usually if it does get too out of control, creating a new user and copying your data over is still much quicker than having to do a reinstall. And to add what you're saying about the experimentation bit, we have an experimental Cosmic image, and that desktop is in active development, right? It's still in alpha. So a system like this is really useful because one day the desktop might work and the next day it might not work. So being able to pin to a specific version is very useful. And then when you're done kind of playing, you're like, okay, I've checked it out. Let me rebase back to my stable thing, and then I'll check this out in a month. It's a great way to follow along with the development of something like that.
One question I have for you, George. One of the selling points is you have 90 days of rollbacks and everything's in GitHub and everything's GitHub actioned. And if you want to write your own GitHub action, you've got YAML files and the documentation for, you can essentially create your own bespoke image and have Microsoft build that for you, which is all great. Do you ever get nervous that Microsoft might follow the wave of enshittification and go, actually, George, quite a lot of people are using quite a lot of storage and CI/CD infrastructure. Can we have some money for this, please? Have you ever thought about what would happen?
Sure. Well, the project's large enough. We pay for GitHub. I'm paying about $60 a month, I think, to get whatever the medium-sized plan is. In the grand scheme of things, compared to the scale of everything that is running on GitHub, we don't really register. However, one of the nice things about the cloud pattern, like when you mention cloud native to a cynical person, right? They're just like someone else's computer, but all the cloud native stuff also runs on bare metal. That's kind of the point. So if you really wanted to, like if you git clone any one of our images, you can Podman build it on the spot. It takes about 2 commands to set up your own registry on your home lab. I would love to have a more pre-built kind of, git clone this thing, type Docker compose up, and there's your operating system factory right in your home lab, right? And you rebase all your stuff to it, and it's all cached and all of that stuff. All 100% possible. We just haven't gotten around to it. If someone wants to do that, that'd be really fantastic. But one of the great things about reusing registries and things like that is, if not GitHub, we can kind of host anywhere.
I think the really nice thing about actions in that case, specifically for your question, Chris, is that you can bring your own runners. So if you could have your own GitHub Actions runners, maybe that run on the same technologies that you're pushing for all of this, those don't count against your minutes, and you can provide storage elsewhere for container registries. So you can still be on GitHub without using GitHub's minutes if they decide that we're going to have the minutes this month. Thanks, Microsoft.
Yeah.
There are options there, certainly.
And the free tier is pretty generous for open source projects.
Oh, absolutely.
The only reason we were investigating private runners and things like that were for ARM builds. But GitHub has those now, and that's actually something that we're working on, is getting ARM builds out.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by Kolide. When you go through airport security, there's one line where the TSA agent checks your ID and another where a machine scans your bag. The same thing happens in enterprise security. But instead of passengers and luggage, it's end users and their devices. These days, most companies are pretty good at the first part of the equation, where they check user identity. But user devices can roll right through authentication without getting inspected at all. In fact, a huge percentage of companies allow unmanaged, untrusted devices to access their data. That means an employee can log in from a laptop that has its firewall turned off and hasn't been updated in 6 months. Or worse, that laptop might belong to a bad actor using employee credentials. Kolide finally solves the device trust problem. Kolide ensures that no device can log into your Okta-protected apps unless it passes your security checks. Plus, you can use Kolide on devices without MDM, like your Linux fleet, contractor devices, and every BYOD phone and laptop in your company. So support the show and go to kolide.com/LinuxAfterDark to watch a demo and see how it works. That's KOLIDE.com/LinuxAfterDark. Quick bit of admin then. First of all, thank you everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to linuxafterdark.net/support. And for either $5 or $10 a month on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And if you want to get in contact with us, you can email show@linuxafterdark.net. So what we've talked about so far has generally been really quite technical and for heavily technical users. But my understanding was that one of your goals was to make something that you can just give to a non-technical user and will just be bulletproof for them. Is that still the case, or has it kind of gone down this technical path where it's all about what you can do with it and, all the stuff Chris was doing with pinning and stuff?
Yeah.
Or is it something I can just give to someone who doesn't even know what Linux is and just they open the browser and just go?
Yeah. So for people like us, images like DX, that's exactly why I made them, right? It's also like, I want the most powerful Linux workstation ever designed by a human. That's like my goal when I make DX, right? Like you open the terminal, you want to feel like a god that day, right? But also, I could go to my Best Buy, spend $300 and get like a working computer, and I could give that to anybody, and that's a Linux, but I can't do that with like a traditional distribution unless I want to be a system administrator, right? And I also don't want to do that. So Bluefin, the non-DX version, and in some ways Bazzite is kind of like our examples of a market that we're trying to reach that I think distributions have been underserving this entire time, which is people who don't want to know or care about Linux at all. Sometimes nerds like us, when they see what we put in Bluefin, right, it like triggers all their 1990s Linuxisms, right? Where it's like automated updates. No, I want the freedom to choose this, and that. Whereas normal people are like, look, man, I just need a computer to click open, go to Spotify.com, and Metallica needs to come out the speakers, or I hate this thing, right? So, in a lot of ways, it's like, look, you got GNOME, you got Firefox, you can pick whatever browser you want, and that could handle 95% of users if we can get rid of the jank that they don't want to do. So that's why we do automated updates. We gate things behind flags for some cases, or we try to do the things that like your system administrator would do to your work machine to like make it work for whatever. So that's why we add the codecs for them. We kind of have this policy of don't do a pop-up to ask users to like, this is an infuriating thing about normal Linux desktops, right? It's like you install it and then they open a pop-up that's like an unbreak me button for your computer, right? Where it's like, yes, I want codecs. Why would you ask me that? Like, who would say no to that except Linux nerds who want to...
The purists, George.
Yeah,
the purists.
I get it, dude. I've been there, but also, 4% after 30 years, that's not awesome, So we've kind of decided we're going to go after the 96%, and it might piss off some of the 4%, but I'm not taking Debian away from you. So we started out with that attitude a little bit, but then over the past year, we've seen it come to fruition where if you look up Universal Blue or Bazzite, you're not going to see coverage from Linux sites usually, or Linux YouTubers or things like that, except for Joe, because Joe was the first one to figure it out. But Bazzite is being reviewed by YouTube gamers. And you know what they don't mention? KDE, they don't mention GNOME. They do not care.
Yeah.
They had a ROG Ally that was not running awesome, and then they found a thing, and they installed a USB stick, and they were able to get Witcher running, and they're happy with their device. And when you watch these YouTubers, it's very interesting from a Linux perspective because they're getting a lot of the tech stuff wrong. But these days, we're kind of more of the attitude, dude, you don't even need to care about that. So we reach out to them, kind of help them on the tech stuff. And then I'm finding that a lot of our users, especially with Bazzite, they're new to Linux. Like they weren't using a Linux before. They had the device first, or they have a friend that had it, or maybe they're a gamer and they'd heard about this Linux gaming thing, but they didn't know how to get started. And this model in particular is you don't use Bazzite because of Bazzite. You use Bazzite because Kyle and those people know Linux gaming backwards and forwards. And Bazzite in the cloud native pattern enables them to ship that config as an atomic layer on top of the distro, not a distro, right? That's why we say it's not a distro, but it's the equivalent of Kyle going to every single Bazzite person's computer and setting it up for them. And in the enterprise, we've had this for years, right? Somebody writes an Ansible playbook or, whatever Puppet thing, or there's just tons of tools that do this already, right? But the ability to do it quickly using techniques that are kind of relatively already well known by system administrators in the field that are mostly production and battle tested, and being able to apply that stuff so that like your Steam Deck runs a little bit better is getting us, I think, an entirely new audience than, a typical Linux might not do. So it's kind of energizing in that way because there's what we think users want as Linux users, and then there's what users actually want, which is interesting.
And it's the idea that it's kind of a gateway into the DX images and stuff.
Yeah.
For the small percentage of people who actually care about it.
Right. Because there'll always be less developers and gamers, but out there somewhere, some kid is going to be like, this stuff is pretty cool. I'm liking the Linux thing. And then they have all the tools that they need in order to be able to grow into that field if they so choose. So it is also really nice that the way that we design and run these systems on our desktops mirrors how professionals deploy their Kubernetes clusters, right? So everything that you're learning has a place for you in your professional toolkit later on if you so choose to do that. that's cool because we need open source maintainers and we need their energy.
Yeah, and I think this is what I thought was really cool, is that I work with this stuff day in, day out at work. And I also have had my mum, for example, who's been running Ubuntu on her PC for years. And I go around there and I do an apt update, and there are like 200 packages that need updating because she hasn't done it. Or she's scared to click something to update a set of drivers or update codecs or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And if I can now use the technology that I know and understand and work with in my day job to bake an image for her that's like, this is Mum's OS, and it has Chrome and LibreOffice and VLC, and they're like the 3 apps that she uses. And I can just deploy that and not think about it for 5 years. That's great. Whereas at the moment, every time I go around, it's, I better go in and turn on the computer and do an apt upgrade.
Yeah, and what's really great is because you control the image, you can put the VPN config on there. So I put Tailscale on mine. So if I ever need to manage one of the computers, it's always on the right network. And I always have the tools there in the background. So if I do get into trouble, like if you ever had to walk a normal person through like getting their computer for remote desktop and stuff, and you're like, oh man, I should have set this up beforehand.
It's a nightmare, right?
My favorite bit is nothing's coming up. It's broken. The keyboard's not working. I'm typing, but it's not. No, it's blank, but it's there. But how do I know it's there? Just trust it and press enter.
I mean, my mum's the kind of person, right, that her mouse broke the other week, and I just sent her an Amazon link, and she was like, can you come and plug it in for me? I don't know how to plug this mouse in. So to give her something that I just don't have to worry about would be great. And similarly, like for me, right, I have a laptop that sits out in my garage over there, and I use it like maybe once a month when I'm doing some server maintenance, so I don't have to take my nice laptop out there and risk dropping it on concrete or something. If I could put something like this on there where I just don't have to think about it, and I know it's got my SSH key on, it's got a browser that's going to be up to date, and I can open a terminal, and that's all I need, then something like this is perfect for that. I don't need a full-blown distro there, right? I just need something where I can open a browser to get onto a KVM or SSH or whatever it is. And to not have to think about another machine to maintain when I've already got a home lab with a bunch of VMs and containers and Kubernetes clusters and whatever else it is great, right? Like it takes that burden away from me, even as someone who plays system administrator in my spare time.
So I think the part that we're really glossing over here is that this does for desktops what Docker did for application deployment. And I think that's something that doesn't really get talked about all that much, that you can just Docker build this thing, and if you don't like it, you can change 2 commands in this one file and get the completely different experience that you want. And you can repeatably do that and just do it over and over, and you automatically get the updates when you do that because you aren't pinning to any certain version of Fedora or whatever when you start that off. I think the real magic is just the mutability of this atomic desktop.
Yeah.
A weird way to say it.
That's why we're starting to use the term composable more and more, which is when you say immutability, right? People kind of,
You've ruined it, George. I can't edit anything on my system.
Yeah, it's like, I have a Chromebook. I hate the thing because I can't change anything, right? Because people conflate the payload with the mechanism. But if we reuse that mechanism, but the payload is exactly what we want, and we recognize that the customization and thing happens all ahead of time and not at runtime, I liken it to having a stamp at the very end. You're like, my perfect Linux desktop. Right? Like, and now it's seared into that image. And you mentioned this, the nice thing is it's built fresh every day. So when you get the update, it's nice and clean. When Gary mentioned visiting the relative, right? It's like, oh no, they haven't run an update in 2 years. Like, you ever have to skip a version of Ubuntu before? Like, it's sweaty. Like, you're like, oh man, I got to take it up a minder for, why didn't I set them up on LTS? Oh, I couldn't because they needed newer software, like you end up in this like traditional mess of things where it's just like, I don't understand. I could just, there have been people that I just get so frustrated with that I just tell them to go buy a Chromebook. That's also what I did. I went to a recycling place and I got a $200 used Dell and I put normal Bluefin on it. And I just use it as a consumption device, as a tablet. And I've had to do 0 maintenance on it in 18 months. And I use that as kind of if I ever have to touch this computer, we're really messing it up.
Yeah, because you're doing all the maintenance somewhere else, not on the machine itself, right?
Exactly. So just due to the nature of automation, right? When we do mess up, just the image doesn't build that day and it doesn't get on the device. So yeah, it's been maintenance free for 18 months. By default on the ISOs and things, we assign you a little convenience tag. So you don't even need to do the major dist upgrades between 38, 39, 40. You could just say, I want to be on colon latest, or I want to be what we call colon GTS, which is for Bluefin, which is Fedora -1. So you can avoid a little bit of that churn that's happening in the latest edition when it comes out. But we're looking at ways of making that throttle a little bit more granular so that people can get what they want. And there is work happening in CentOS Stream. So at some point, if you want to roll with a more LTS style enterprise level of updates that aren't as aggressive as Fedora, you could just from a CentOS image instead and then be able to do it that way. But that's something that we're not involved with. We're just kind of seeing, I'm kind of watching everything going into those things. So I'm looking forward to seeing those images come out.
It's been absolutely great having you, George, and we could talk to you all day, but we should probably get out of here. I'll put some links in the show notes, but we'll be back in a couple of weeks. Until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Chris.
I've been Gary.
I've been Dalton.
And I've been George.
See you later.